Welcome to another episode of Green and Gritty.
We are 4 master's students trying to make environmental education a little more accessible.
We are so excited that you joined us today in our little corner of the internet.
So stick around. This is going to be a fun episode.
We want to start this episode off by saying that it is incredible to have young voices like Greta Thunberg be present in public media and be raising awareness for climate change, but it's also really important to credit and celebrate teens of color for their work in environmental activism. Environmental activism and climate justice are about making sure society is forced to reckon with the full scope of climate destruction, and it's super harmful to only see this movement through white eyes because the work of so many youth activists from BIPOC communities are sidelined or erased completely. So, this is our attempt at highlighting some of the brilliant young activists from North America while also reflecting on our own activism. Even though we are in our own little corner of the internet, we would love to create the space where everyone, you or a friend, feel as though you are truly involved. So if you would like to tell your story, slide into our DMs and we would love to open the space to community engagement and learn from one another.
This week, we're going to highlight young activists in environmentalism and discuss our experiences in this field. I want to start off by asking what everyone's first experience was with environmental-based activism.
I think for me, it all kind of started in high school, like in my grade 9, 10 years. I remember learning that we had an eco club at my high school, and like I was pretty eager to get involved. I know it was like, it was seen as kind of lame to be like super involved in clubs in high school, but this was something I actually found passion with, and I really resonated with the things they talked about. So I think that's when I would say my activism with environmentalism started.
I love that you got involved at a young age. Was there anybody that like told you about Eco Kids, or is there anybody that kind of like a teacher or a person, like a friend, or like a cause that you heard about and you're like, I need to do something?
I think I remember hearing on the morning announcements one day it was something to do with like the water bottle recycling program they had just started, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like they're like now taking all this like plastic and trying to do something good with it. I think I don't remember exactly what the program was, but I know they were like keeping track.
It sounds really similar to like what Kendra was doing in her
I know, that's what I was thinking too, because I'm like, they did that because they were trying to put in a new water bottle filling station to see how many they could eliminate. And that's I actually got involved in high school, was like fundraising and campaigning for the new water filling stations in the school. And I remember we put 2 in, and I literally say this in all my job interviews because it's like one of my greatest achievements is getting this for the high school, is getting the water bottle filling stations. So I just remember like being attentive to that and listening to that on the announcements, and I was like, this is something I could be really interested in and like kind of contribute positively to. So like, I'm gonna get involved. Why not? Let's do it.
Were they those water bottles filling stations that they then have that reader at the top, and it's like you filled up so many plastic water bottles?
I know. I would love to go back now and just see like how many we've put in. I mean, how many?
I love how
many put in. How many water bottles? How much plastic we have saved with those stations?
But also, it'd be cool to see how much you guys saved, and then to see if there was a transition once they lightweighted the plastic water bottles, to see if there's actually a difference. I think it's so cool that everyone's like first interaction with like environment, they realize how many plastic water bottles they use and then try and cut back. I think that's pretty interesting because it's right in front of us.
It's a crazy number when you really think about it. Like, I like, even when you think of like not even beyond water bottles, it's like I think about like Starbucks cups, and especially now since they're not letting us bring our own reusable ones, I'm like, I can't even feel good about going to get a coffee anymore because it's gonna be in a cup that I have to throw away and I can't wash and use again. So it's disgusting to think about, to be honest.
I think it's really cool that you got involved in high school with like the eco clubs. I remember we had an eco club. I wasn't too involved in that, only because of the sports that I had, like the commitments. But the one major involvement that I remember is I helped out, I believe it was with the Sound of Music festival that was happening in the summer, and I was part of like a small handful of kids who were on, ironically, the trash team. So we were responsible we stood at a table like all night, and then we people would bring us their garbage, and then we would separate it into the appropriate
You have been
bins.
a trash woman since the beginning of time.
No,
You found your
I'm
In the
a
most
lady.
genuine, nice way possible.
I just think
that.
it's so interesting because I just think it leads back to like our consumer habits, things we don't even think about. We just use. And then it was interesting because that was the first time that I was, or not, that I really saw how food kind of destroys the opportunity to recycle something, and how people like scrunch up napkins. And I became very aware of napkins then, because they would just like put it in their drinks and their cups, and like the ketchups would all, and other condiments would all get kind of mixed up. So it smelled bad, but it was a really fun experience, and I think that kind of like subconsciously projected me into where I am now. So that's really memorable. I wore a green shirt, I was by the lake listening to some cool music, learning about garbage. What other better night could you have on a weekend in high school?
Sounds
like
pretty great to me, to be honest.
Cottage dream, like a cottage core fantasy dream.
Honestly, if I would have was composting right then and there, I think that would have been the peak of my high school life.
I love that.
And
Me
I'm
too.
serious too.
Oh, I know. We know you're serious. We know. And that's why I love you.
Aw.
My first experience with okay, you know what actually is kind of cool? My elementary school, I don't know what was going on, but they had some really cool stuff. So like, I think it was in our first, I talked about my really awesome grade 6 teacher that just really got me into it. But I was talking to my mom or something about like the episode, because she listened. Hi, Mom. And she reminded me, actually, do you remember the documentary Shark Water?
I'm scared of sharks. I respect their space.
Okay.
And then they respect mine.
It was a documentary by Rob Stewart, who sadly has passed away since. But it was all about protecting sharks and changing government policy and stuff, and just all about shark conservation. And when it came out, I have this vague memory. I don't know if he came to my school, if Rob Stewart came.
Ooh.
I don't believe that's possible. But Shark Water came, and they had an exhibit. They had an old shark tank, not a shark in it, but a shark tank on display to show how inhumane.
Cool, yeah.
These like facilities can be. The movie isn't necessarily about the facilities, but that's what the presentation also talked about. And so I remember being like, "Are you kidding? This is ridiculous!" And like little 10-year-old me was like hyped, like I need to like save the sharks. Like this is a thing now. And then I don't know how it spiraled, and then I really got into like looking up like different marine life conservation stuff, like Sea Shepherd, which is like getting involved in a lot of the anti-whaling movements and a lot of the anti-poaching, that's again what started it. There was my grade 6 teacher, and then I went full-blown like get on, like I wanted to be on a ship, and I wanted to be going up to whalers and with this boat, and like, don't do it. It was awesome.
I believe you could have done that as 10-year-old Kendra.
Yeah, I
If anyone, it
Power
would
and
have
the
been her.
passion. Just stand at the top of the boat, hands on railings, and just like yelling with a very passionate speech on why they should stop immediately.
Oh no, my thing is
Coast Guard comes behind to arrest them or whatever to stop them.
Coast Guard would have arrested me, because my whole thing is I wouldn't have really said or done anything effective. I would have just been there being like, hey, you should stop that. Please.
this.
Chaotic from the beginning.
Sometimes I feel like that has more impact. Just stop that.
Stop that,
Don't
please.
do that anymore.
Or what's that one
Thanks.
meme where it's like, stop that. Get some help.
Yeah, oh,
Anyways.
you know what? I kind of, I relate to that hard, Kendra, just because, like, I want to say, like, I was loving on the earth from the beginning, and I probably was, but what really, like, kickstarted me is, like, I'm animal obsessed, like, so obsessed, like, with every animal. Like, I'm like, I want to pet it, I want to hug it, I want to protect it. What can I do for this animal? Like, to the point where I was like, animals are better than humans. Like, they should just take over the world.
Still, for a fact, I believe that to be true today.
I'm like, they should just
Continue.
reclaim their space. Like, get rid of us,
Do it.
make it animals.
know.
So I think, like, that always, like, agitated me, that, like, people would, like, actively try to, like, poach them, and you would hear all this stuff about animals going extinct, and I was like, no. Like, as a kid, I was like, this can't happen. Like, what can I do? And then like what you were saying about the sharks, I think it's called Sea World or Marineland. It's Marineland in Niagara Falls. And I went there and I was like, no, something is not sitting right here. I felt like terrible. And I was like, no. So I think that's where it all began, like with the animals. And I think, Kendra, you're going to like the first activist that I discuss, because she is nicknamed the Water Warrior. So it's Autumn Peltier. She's just about 16 years old. She is a member of the Anishinaabe and Wikimekong First Nation in Canada. She is a clean water activist, as I mentioned. And I think a huge highlight of her achievements is she actually directly confronted Justin Trudeau during a conference and questioned him about pipelines and why he took part in it and why a lot of Indigenous people don't have clean water in Canada. And I think that's super cool, especially considering her age and her position. And it blew my mind away when I found out that fact about her. She's
just
actually
the courage to stand up to someone of that stature about an issue that seems very minuscule to be on the prime minister's agenda. Like that takes some balls to do that. That's
badass
amazing.
move right there.
Not to get too deep into the pipeline topic, because I know we have a lot we want to cover, but I just think regarding pipelines and the way of life for a lot of, well, pretty much all Indigenous communities is that it's just a fundamental right to have access to clean water, and pipelines threaten that fundamental right. So I don't know, it's hard for me to see the other side of the argument. I get the economy, I get capitalism, but there's got to be a way around it. Like, they have proposed alternative methods, they proposed alternative routes, and they don't listen. So it's tough.
I think it's very interesting how a country with so much this access to fresh water, the position we are with water in this world, that we have to have someone like Autumn be advocating and fighting for something such as water. I think it's upsetting, but her work is outstanding. It's crazy. She's won over 13 awards in regards to her work and achievements.
Wow.
Something unreal. And since we were discussing everyone's first experiences, she's documented from the age of 8 at attending water ceremonies on First Nation reservations, and she continues her work for the access of clean water, and she actually advocates for Indigenous people across the world. And she works a lot in Indigenous feminism and how this all works within the environment. And I find it so amazing also that about how she tries to advocate for Indigenous people across the world, just because she really sees everyone and their struggles at such a young age and has done so much to achieve where she is. So that was my first activist that I wanted to highlight, because she honestly inspires me. She
sounds
incredible.
Like a friggin' queen.
So well spoken.
And
there was sorry, go ahead, Kendra.
Just so that people know, there is a documentary about Autumn coming out very, very soon, and I will look that up real quickly so I can give that to you, Taylor, if you want to keep talking.
But it was like 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, but less than 1% of that is fresh water, and then only 1% of that 1% is accessible for human use. Mm-hmm. So like that is just shows how like valuable this is. And I know like a lot, like there are some renewable sources, like groundwater I know in most areas is a renewable resource, but we can't just take that for granted and
you know, one of my biggest fears is the possibility of the privatization of water.
That's a very good point.
Okay,
actually,
that's a conversation that we can definitely have.
No, it's not a conversation for later. It's just like a little add-on.
I just have so much to say, but also
me too.
As
we need a Kendra water segment.
Because one time I saw like a stock on water, and then I got so scared. And I was like, this is too much for today. And it wasn't even more than like 30 seconds of just listening to the TV.
Oh, it's awful. Just as an update for people that are interested. So Anishinaabe Nation Chief Water Commissioner Autumn Peltier will soon have yet another impressive venue to further her advocacy for clean drinking water. And that is in the form of a documentary that has premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. We just know it as TIFF, and that was premiered on September 14th. So if you want to learn more about Autumn and all the amazing, inspiring work that they're doing, go check that out. I think movie night is in order very soon.
I completely agree.
I'll bring the wine.
The film is called The Water Walker, for those interested.
Ooh. Awesome. That's great, Kendra. Thanks.
Sorry. Okay.
Man, I am so inspired by Autumn right now. I wish that I could also look back as my 8-year-old, 10-year-old self and get more involved. But I'm curious, I know we're very, very involved and we think a lot about environmentalism, the four of us today with our present activities and academics. But if we flash back to when we were younger, what were the kind of activities that we were thinking about? I'm really curious about that.
Oh my God.
Okay, wait. I had this conversation in class.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of our classmates, Andrea, we all had class. Yeah, love her.
Hey, Andrea.
Hey, girl. How's it going?
Hopefully you're listening.
We were it was actually Professor Winfield's Policy 2 class, and we were talking what happened to acid rain. When I was 7 years old, I swear I was so stressed out about acid rain. I would think about it all the time, and I remember I was bawling my eyes out because it was raining one day and I was terrified to go outside, and my dad's like, no, they're just saying that that's something that could happen. It's not happening yet. So that was on my mind. But then I realized also prime example of how, human action can alter the course of predicted negative incomes, because acid rain is no longer on our radar. We were able to reverse the process enough, or the damage that we had done enough, that acid rain is not nearly as big of a threat as it was. I think it was that would have been about 13 years ago. 13? Yeah, about 13 years ago. So that was on my brain as a child. I was terrified of acid rain and quicksand. I couldn't tell you.
I used to think that mud would turn into quicksand after it rained, to be honest. So I really tried to avoid mud and puddles. So I got really stressed out whenever I saw dogs playing in mud and then other kids in school, and I'm like, what?
You're they're gonna die.
Puddles can be deep. Are we not more concerned about our safety?
Puddles can be deep.
Is this not a pool?
Lessons with Taylor. Puddles can be deep.
Yeah. Hey.
I need that on a t-shirt.
Aren't we all puddles when you really think about it?
Oh my goodness. It's intriguing to see what we were so concerned about when we were so young, and now we're like, oh, okay.
I mean, I know when I was younger, I mean not so much as young as 8, 9 years old, because I really don't remember much before I was 15, but I think my earliest memory would be I was super, super concerned about recycling, and I thought it was the end-all be-all solution to every problem in the world. And so for a couple years, I was hardcore into making sure everyone in the school, in my house, on the block, had the proper recycling bins, had the proper materials in the proper bins. They were using green bins, and when my mom didn't use the green bin, I was picking through the garbage, pulling out banana peels and putting them in properly. So I was this is gonna work, this is gonna do it all. And I know we kind of mentioned before, recycling scam,
and definitely based on the article at the end that NPR came out with a few days ago, it's borderline scam, which is really upsetting.
Yeah. It's nice to know that my childhood thoughts were a sham.
Your actions didn't do much.
Yeah. All my efforts, my garbage picking didn't go to use.
That's why it has to be collective action and not just individual.
Yeah. The intent was there. However, the effect was null. No, it's too dark. That's too dark. I feel like it's really incredible hearing about Autumn and also some of the other activists we're going to talk about, because as much as I was concerned about acid rain, it wasn't from an environmental standpoint. It was just I had a horror movie idea of what acid rain looked like. Honestly, I think all I thought about growing up until I was way too old, was probably Webkins, Neopets, and what I was going to have for lunch at school. Even in high school, I was a little active, and much so later, but I was not, and that's on privilege.
Cut.
Oh, good point.
That's a good way to end it right there.
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you for coming to this week's episode.
Thanks for staying.
I think that's a good acknowledgement, though, because like I definitely wasn't thinking about environmentalism when I was in high school. In high school, all I cared about was going to hockey practice, going to rugby practice, and then balancing my part-time job and school so I could save up money to pay for university while getting the grades to go to my dream university. That was all I cared about, was just like getting into school. And I didn't have like, I just didn't really pay attention to what was going around me until later in like the 12th grade, when I was like, oh,
the veil
real life is
and
outside of these 4 years.
Yeah.
I have to start thinking more about what I'm going to actually contribute to society and how I'm going to help out, and not just be like a participant.
Once you get a glimpse and you start understanding, you're in.
Sorting that trash all that night, that beautiful night by the lake, really
beautiful
sold
breezy
me.
night.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, no, like this whole conversation is really bringing to mind one little activist that just blew my mind when I first read about her. So her name is a Mariana, or short form Mary Copeny. She goes by Little Miss Flint, and she's 13 years old. She lives in Michigan, and her activism started when she first learned of the water crisis in Flint in 2015. And at that time, she was 8 years old. So similar to Autumn, it was such a super young age to get involved at. And it's so inspiring to see this kind of action at such a young age. But Mary wrote a letter to Barack Obama when he was president, voicing her concerns with the water crisis in her state. And that letter resulted in Obama going to visit Flint to see the devastation firsthand, which then resulted in the declaration of a federal state of emergency in January 2016, and also contributed to a nationwide awareness of the city's critical situation.
Mic drop.
Right? So
Yeah.
like one
Incredible.
letter from this
Really.
girl sparked all that. And I think with the declaration...
Are you me?
We're stealing the Declaration of Independence. Nick Cage has entered the chat.
But following that, in an interview with Vox, Mary also noted how the climate movement really needed to address issues of environmental racism, because it was a huge, huge part in the climate movement, but it's treated by most as a non-issue.
Preach.
Danielle? Yeah. Okay, I was going to say if you wanted to add anything to add in there.
Yeah. What bothers me so much is that climate efforts and the climate movement isn't inherently linked with climate justice. I think that's the biggest issue. This is how people get left behind, and these vulnerable groups get affected. So that's why, I'm literally like preaching to the air when you say that.
Yeah.
It kind of ties back to last week when I was talking about, I brought up the Flint crisis and how that's a key thing in environmental racism. So I'm so glad you're discussing her and bringing this forward. I'm so glad you're telling us about her.
Yeah, and it's so important to acknowledge that is an interlinked issue, because there's a lot of communities that get left behind in environmental issues, and disproportionate minority communities typically do not have the same access to the means
Supports.
of like, yeah, exactly.
I think also a lot of the avenues or channels that individuals could choose to receive justice for various demographics and communities, those channels are closed. It's racialized. It's very systemic. It's systemic racism. And so it's already you have various barriers that we've talked about in the last episode and a little bit today, but also like the channels and avenues that some people could use to seek justice don't exist. They don't exist. They aren't open.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother side of it too.
I was just gonna say, like, it's super important to acknowledge that this is such an interlinked issue, because sometimes there is a very large barrier to accessibility or to investments in overcoming issues related to climate change, and that's something that people get left behind with, and it's not really fair. So like Kendra said, it's a systemic issue. It's been ingrained in the environmental movement for a long, long time, and it's something that really needs to be addressed and tackled. Moving forward to today, though, Mary Copeny continues to do her advocacy work that she started when she was 8. Currently, she holds weekly water distribution events for thousands of Flint residents to provide access to clean water. And she's also partnered, this is what I found so cool, that she's so young and she did this. She's partnered with a water filtration company called Hydroviv to create She made her own water filter that can provide the equivalent of 160 water bottles for every $1 donated.
God damn.
Like, look at those numbers.
Yes.
You donate
Yes.
$1, someone gets 160 water bottles. That's incredible. Plastic issue aside, that's incredible for access to water.
But that's another issue too. Like what we're talking about is the stigma. Like it is a necessity. They need the plastic water bottles. They need the certainty and safety of the water within those. So that is incredible.
Exactly.
And to visualize it, that's 6 cases. That's about 6.5 cases of 24 packs of water bottles. So
that's a very significant number, and for only $1, like that is.
I'm really glad that
donate.
you're discussing how to include. Like, I think we're all really discussing how to include these activists in the process, because I think a huge thing, not to throw jargon, but is procedural justice. We need to be more transparent. We need to be more equitable when we make these decisions. And it plays a huge role when we integrate climate justice into climate change planning and interventions. Like, we need to be not only more informed about, like, it will help in not just more informing further about these environmental and climate injustices, but in how we can really address them, right? Like, I think that's where the biggest gap is found. And if we don't increase this community engagement in our decision and policy processes, I think this is where we find entrenched interests that just take over all of that. So
absolutely, that's a great point, Danielle. That's great. But in addition to Mary, there were so many other powerful young activists that I really, really wanted to discuss here. There was one thing I noticed among all these youths is a common message of justice for our environment and for our future. And there is just like a relentless passion to fight for this justice. And it's so inspiring. Like, I cannot wait to see what they do in the future. Starting from such young ages is just chef's kiss.
See. It really is. I honestly can't even wait to see how they continue to innovate in how they bring people in and how they show their passion, because you can feel their passion when you see any kind of post on social media, from Instagram, Facebook to TikTok has been
Gen
really
Z is shaking it up, man. I feel the friggin' world quaking with their eruption for the climate crisis. They are popping off, and I love it.
They're aware, they're active, they're involved, but it kind of,
and they're loud, and they come in numbers. Yeah. It's amazing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. They're able to like connect with the whole like global community or national community, depending on how far their algorithm reaches, I guess.
Yeah.
But I'm nervous only because of how much they're on social media, and like we kind of are aware of like the downsides to mental health when it comes to like being aware of social media. You're on it and you can read everything, and it's instant, and anyone can give you their opinion because everyone can post online. So I'm worried for like media literacy and who's teaching them that,
right?
And if accurate information is coming towards them or not. So I'm kind of, what do you guys think would be like some tips on if someone's listening who's getting into the game?
I think one important thing to remember is that free information should always be looked at with a very critical eye. You should always question, why is this article free? Why am I not paying for this journalism? In most cases, it's probably accurate, but I mean,
it might be accurate, but also check the tone of how it's written, who it's coming from. What do they want
you to take from this article? What are they trying to get you to feel?
And you can normally see that based on the headline, and if there's like clickbait in whatever you're seeing, and then really give strong attention to how they write it, and then like you said, how you feel after you read it or watch the information, and then try and like fact check it with a different media source to compare the two.
I think a really good point that Taylor was talking about the like, if it's free, like second guess. And I think one of the key reasons behind that is you have to, it's not okay. I do think that education is a right, and it's a right for information. However, unfortunately, that's not the way the world works all the time, and you do have to pay for information. So when information is free, somebody is paying for it, right? And so you have to do your research. Like, you have to, if you're looking at a news company, like who owns it? Does it have political party affiliations? Does that party have a certain stance on issues, and that's why maybe certain topics aren't going to be covered in a encompassing way? So like what Taylor said is so important. So when you're doing your own research, like, something that we're always taught that I don't think it's all about media literacy. It's also scientific literacy. If you're reading a scientific journal, who funded the experiments? Who funded the investigation? That goes at every level, is like, ask yourself these questions, like, who was writing it? Who did they include? And who funded it? And who published it? Like, those are types of things you need to think about. Oh, yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say one more point on the media literacy. Like, it is so important, especially in today's day and age, to have this kind of critical thinking skill, because there is infinite amount of information out there. It just literally, one Google search gives you a million things to look at. But even I think it's a skill that should be taught in school.
Mm-hmm.
But the Google searches are based on an algorithm too, and who's paying for those like top page spaces. Mm-hmm. So you have to like really be critical of that as well. And then also with the science literacy, if you're reading like a study, who performed that study and who paid for the study, on top of who's funding like and paying for the article or the journal that it's in.
I think that it does go back to what we're talking about, which is young activists. So like, the problem is like we were saying, is kids have so much access, right? Which is a good thing because it allows like youth activism because they know what they need to know. However, like, it's this expectation, like, how is a 13-year-old, how are these 16-year-olds also have all of this pressure of being able to sift through information and know like, oh, I have to look up who funded this. I have to look up this and that. Like, it's a very real
while also dealing with the pressures of not coming across as just doing like performative activism if they really are passionate about a certain issue. So like, there's a lot of,
and it's even harder because like personally I feel like I just learned how to like the doors to critical thinking just opened for me like when I entered into like my 4th year university or like my master's. Like it's a hard skill to learn, and like especially for new generations coming in and being super passionate about this kind of environmental movements and activism, it's hard to have that skill at that young age because it's not easy to learn. It's almost like unlearning what you've been taught so far.
Yeah.
It comes with like age and experience
and education for sure. Yeah.
I also kind of wanted to go back. I think Taylor, earlier you mentioned like also the mental health of it all, which is, I feel like there's so much pressure, and I think one of our later questions that we're gonna discuss about is how it should be. And I feel like we have access to so much information. It can be very daunting, it can be very concerning, and a lot of it isn't, well, even our last episode, it's not very happy. And I do wonder, like, we look up to these young activists who are doing incredible, phenomenal things, and I'm like, that's a lot of pressure. And that's something that I wish a 13-year-old did not have to do.
You're absolutely correct. It shouldn't have to fall on the shoulders of such young
I'm
children.
So proud
Yeah.
of all these young kids going out there and standing up for what they know and truly believe to be right. But I am so sad that the government bodies who are supposed to be for us and working to protect us are failing. Like, I really want to cry when I think about it, because like water, that's a necessity for life, and the fact that children from a young age have to not only be aware of the problem but then
demand respect,
and they have to shoulder the burden of it all, because it's them who's going to face the most issues because of it, because of everything we've done. Not us four per se, but everything that generations prior to us have done and left for this new generation is awful.
I'm really glad, Taylor, that you talked about government bodies and keeping them accountable, and young people having to fight with these governments to basically fight for their rights, because it kind of ties really well into my second activist. Her name is Jamie Margolin. She's 18 years old. She is a leader in intersectionality in this movement. She identifies as Latina, Jewish, and LGBTQ+, and she's a climate justice activist in the States. So like I said, she tries her best to further efforts in intersectionality in this movement, and she's part of the group responsible for organizing the Youth Climate Action March. At just 15, she was actually one of the founders of 0 Hour, which is a climate action organization, with 2 others after Hurricane Maria came through. It really like made her upset. It like hit a chord with her. And in September 2019, she was a part of a youth group that sued Governor Jay Inslee in the state of Washington over greenhouse gas emissions in the state. So
wow, we're suing people now.
Yeah, so
went from letters to
that shocked me.
To calling people out.
I'm
it was
proud of
part
her.
of a panel called Voices Leading the Next Generation on the Global Climate Crisis. So she was asked to testify against them in this panel. And there was other teenagers that were involved in this, and they made their case. So there's a lot of youth that took part in this lawsuit, and they were really concerned about the lack of action that the government in Washington was not taking. And basically, this was the quote of it, that they were denying the younger generation a constitutional right to a livable environment without these environmental issues that they were facing. So
I
I was
remember
shocked by
this.
that. Yeah, it's shocking. And then further, she's written so many publications about climate change that are accessible. So maybe that's a great author for media literacy that we can look into more. And also, she was a part of Teen Vogue's 21 Under 21 in 2018, and was also named one of People
That's
Magazine's
incredible.
25 Women Changing the World. So
That's amazing.
Wow.
I just thought it would be
I
great
love
to
it.
highlight her, because I really like how she takes the intersectionality viewpoint of that. I think that's important.
Good. That is so important to include as well, because it goes back
Yeah.
to what we were saying about how inherently linked systemic racism is in the environmental movement, and bringing this intersectionality perspective to activism is a very, very, very important stance to take.
Based on everything we've learned so far and what we know from our experience in school, if we could look back to our childhood self and pop in to that reality, and we could tell our childhood self something to help either ourselves or our communities in the future, what would that one piece of advice be?
That was the longest question I've ever heard in my life.
I tried to make it fun.
But I get it.
But I get it.
So, like, if I could, knowing what I know now and being in the position of the world that we are now, what would I tell my younger self to help my community in the future?
I think I'll go first. I think
Yeah.
mostly I would just tell myself, well, to A, don't friggin' worry about recycling so much because it doesn't do anything. But B, I think I would tell myself mostly to just keep being aware of what's going on, you know, like watch the news more, get, like, as depressing as it is, just get aware of what is happening in your communities around you, in other parts of the world, because it's hard to keep up now with things that have happened in the past, and how, like, kind of visualizing a timeline in my head of how we got to this state. It's hard to wrap my head around sometimes. So I think if I was following the news and following, you know, media and just learning more about this as when I was younger, I think I would probably be less of a head case about this now. Probably be less distraught and more action driven. But yeah, awareness, I think, is what I would say.
I wanted to go off of that because you helped me figure out what I would say. So when I was in high school, which is still, I'm not proud to admit this, but I definitely had the mentality of, like, politics are boring. Like, why would you be interested in that? Like, there's like, I'd rather be, and I didn't understand the weight of politics isn't boring. Politics is human rights. It very much so. They are interlinked. It is so crucial. Politics is more than just, I think I always, because of how it's represented, I think I just always saw politics as, like, you know, stiff old white guys just yelling at each other about nothing important. And then, you know, the second I actually made an effort, which is when I became of voting age, I learned so much way too fast. And I was like, how did I not give time to this earlier? Because I could have been active earlier.
Exactly.
So then I think I would tell my younger self, just pay attention.
Exactly.
Just take the time.
My experience just kind of diving headfirst into being aware of what's going around me, like, politically, I remember it because growing up, politics was not something we talked about at dinner. We just, like, kept it, we just listened to the news and, like, had our opinions, if we had opinions, like, growing up, like me, that's what I mean. But then I remember it was when Trudeau was running for election when we were in high school, and everyone was saying that they were going to vote for him just because he was attractive. And I thought, what the fuck? You cannot vote for someone because they're attractive. Like, are you going to vote because you agree? And then I also was like, I have no idea what anyone's platform is. And then I just dove in and read. And I'm like, okay, we all have to have an opinion now on you. As I was so like, no, like this is it's going to be affecting everybody, like every Canadian, and the decisions and moving forward. Like you can't just vote because, oh, like Daddy Trudeau. Like it bothers me that we sexualize political figures so much because it distracts. So he has a head of hair. I don't care. Like, that's not, like, I don't know.
Yeah, not a valid base to stand on there.
Yeah. So that's when I got into it, and I would tell myself to just get more involved with your surroundings and don't think so, like, short term of, like, your high school experience and what that's going to bring to you in university just to, like, pay for your university, but to just really open up your view in the world. Because we make a joke, like, when the weather happens in Burlington, like the Burlington bubble, and we get like a lot more rain and stuff because of the lake effect. But I swear, like I had that bubble and just like how I thought the world worked, and it popped. And I wish it popped sooner, but I'm glad it popped.
I want to clarify. You know what I just thought? Because you talked about the bubble, and now I'm making another connection in my brain. Gotta love candid combos. But so yeah, I needed to be more political earlier. Not even more political. I just needed to wake up earlier. But also, I want to say, like, I wish someone had took the time, because when I reflect, you know what? I was actually very environmentally active, but I think my impact reached a standstill because I wish someone, me, would go back, or someone would have clearly established that link behind how government and how structures and how policies, anything environmental, is impacted by that. And if you want to make change, it's not the only way to make change. There's so many different ways to make change. But one of the ways that my brain is most compatible with is through policy and legislative analysis and change. And so I wish I had told my younger self, like, you should really be paying attention to these things. Like, if you want to save the whales, you want to save the rainforest, it's not just about raising money to plant more trees. Why is the rainforest in trouble in the first place? And that's political.
Like finding out the root of the problem.
Exactly.
And not just like a possible solution of planting trees.
And I think like when I was growing up, so many of the environmental initiatives, it was like raise money for the pandas. We're going to breed more pandas or something like that. And so much of my understanding of environmentalism was very Band-Aid effect. It was very much like, it wasn't solution oriented. It was a short-term cover-up. Yeah, exactly. It was symptom-based and not the cause. And that gave me Rocky Horror Picture shows. Like
no, but that's exactly what I mean by awareness. I have younger siblings, and as much as I try to tell them everything that I'm doing and working on in regards to environmental, you know, I'm going to say activism, but I say that loosely. It's tough for them to get involved because, one, I don't think they fully understand the scope of how bad it is, and I don't really want to be the one to depress them that much at such a young age. But at the same time, I wish someone had told me this stuff when I was younger. I wish someone had shown me, you know, articles of what's going on, solutions that are happening, things that aren't happening. Like it all comes down to an awareness of what's going on and figuring out your place in that situation and how you can help that. If that made any sense.
I think that made sense.
That was a big ramble, but yeah, awareness is a big thing, and I think that's what social media is doing a good job of these days. I think it's doing a really good job of putting current issues on blast and also calling out actors who aren't doing their part or not doing enough or doing the wrong thing. But I think there definitely needs to be a continuation of that, maybe a little bit more in depth. Anyway, someone take it away.
So we've talked a lot about young activists. Well, that's our goal for today, is youth in action, and I love it. So I chose a Canadian example that I'd like to bring attention to, but it's actually something that I learned when I think all of us attended the David Suzuki Foundation. I think it was the fellowship gala dinner, and basically
I remember that. That was a fun night. Oh my god, we went to the museum after.
Yeah, we did.
I had
we walked around
ridiculous
the gallery.
outfit on. I remember that. I was wearing my camo pants to the museum.
And middle of David Suzuki's speech, do you remember my haunted phone alarm that I never set went off at 8:30 p.m. in the mid? And I was like shocked and appalled.
You're like, Mr. Suzuki, I apologize.
The disrespect. The disrespect of my
I'll just see
old
myself
haunted
out.
home. Yeah, I need to leave. So it was that night. That's what I wanted to also bring attention to for all of y'all listeners out here. It was a free event. So this was an awesome opportunity to learn about what types of projects and research opportunities are funded. And it was a free event. So there's so many different organizations, foundations, researchers who host these talks and like host these events to raise information. So like talks, galas, networking things that are free for you to register. You register and you can go to them.
And you can find them on Eventbrite, and then if you search up like certain keywords and of topics that you're interested in, and then the radius of the area that you're in are able to travel to, then it will show you and it'll give you a whole detail, a rundown of the night. That's how I found a lot of the events I've been to. So it's a really helpful tool.
And like if like another way of making information accessible, like if you are interested in a topic, use those keywords, look it up, and it's free. And you're talking to some leading people in the industry, and it's a really cool opportunity to get some info. Additionally, I'd like to highlight that during COVID, I have noticed that there's been so many educational forums taking place. A lot of them are over Zoom calls. So that's just my little tip on how you can keep like up to date in the green sector if you'd like. For example, on September 25th, I'll be attending a lecture on the impacts of armed conflict on the environment, which I'm very interested in. So that's just an example of like the variety, the niches that are out there.
And also there should be discounts for students, whether you're in high school, secondary, or post graduation. So even if there's like a price, look into the description and see if there's a discounted rate.
One of the fellowship recipients at the gala that we were at talked about how on October 25th in 2019, 15 young Canadians that actually represented 7 different provinces and 1 territory actually filed a lawsuit in the Federal Court of Canada. So basically, these extremely epic young people were stated that the actions of the Canadian federal government contribute to and allow dangerous levels of greenhouse gas emissions, and therefore it is the federal government who should be held responsible for the climate change impacts that we, and especially young and future generations, are or will be experiencing.
I love how 2 different groups have both come to their governments and be like, hey, so you kind of fucked up our air quality with these greenhouse gases. Please fix it.
I think it's very effective. It does pack a punch. And there was a case, I did it in a class study. There was a case in the Netherlands where they actually, I think they successfully won a case against the government for actions against climate change. So there is examples of this in action, of it working. I think we should do an episode talking about the law on climate change and how you can use it. I think that'd be really beneficial because it seems to be a common thread. But also that only happened just recently. I think it was in 2020. It was in 2019 that the case was won. So I think it'd be really beneficial to see how we can use our structures that do exist. It can be a beneficial thing. So anyways, the case, if you want to learn more about it, is actually called La Rose. If it's pronounced in French, I apologize. I'm not sure. La Rose et al. Versus Her Majesty the Queen, which is pretty dope. And so again, to reiterate, its main goal is to hold Canada accountable for contributing to climate change. So basically the case is arguing that the youth of Canada are already being continuously harmed by climate change, and that the federal government is actually violating their rights to life, liberty, and security under Section 15 of the Charter. Again.
Damn, this is such a powerful case. Like I want to stand up there and fight with them, man. This is awesome.
I know. So they're I can't. This makes me so happy I can't
Seriously.
even stop smiling.
I know.
I'm not happy that they have to do this, but the fact that they did.
Absolutely,
Ooh.
Yep.
Yes.
Power frickin' move.
Honestly. So, okay, it gets better. So, it doesn't get... it's one of those things where it doesn't get better. It just gets spicier, which makes me happy.
I like spicy.
That's a great description.
Yeah, it's spicy. It's a spicy egg
Give us
roll,
the spice, Kenny.
So, they're also stating... Not only did they infringe on their charter rights, they're also stating that the federal government is discriminating against the youth of our country because it is proven that youth are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change.
Wow.
They're bringing out all the stops.
Powerful.
Yeah, that is powerful because it's so true. And it makes you realize the situation we're really in.
they're taking advantage. They're taking advantage of us. So the case has a call to action. So they're not requesting, they're demanding, they're asking that Canada ceases to violate Youth's Charter and public trust rights, and that the federal government should establish and implement a strategic plan focused on reducing the country's greenhouse gas emissions. Just so that we can contextualize these wonderful, wonderful young Canadians. Of the 15 young strong activists, some of their ages include 17, 15, and 13, which is incredible. Mm-hmm.
That is incredible.
I'm so proud. I'm so proud of these people. Love it. I just want to give them a high five, but COVID, so it's like an elbow bump. Yeah. So officially, they're supported by the David Suzuki Foundation. So you can actually find a lot of information about the 15 and about this case on the David Suzuki Foundation webpage. And they also have a press release, which is where I got most of my information for this segment.
Nice.
They're also supported by the Pacific Center for Environmental Law and Litigation, as well as Our Children's Trust and the law firms Arve Finlay LLP, and I think it's Tollefson Law Corporation. So I have so much pride in these kids and in the younger generation in general. Not only are all of them 10 times funnier than I am, because like TikTok is the prime example. I could never. So not only just that, but also I think the willingness of these young people, these young folks to rise to the call to action is inspiring and courageous, especially when it is up against governments that do not support them. So I do want to...
Can I just bump in here? Like that, I was just thinking about that. Like when I was 13 and 15 and 17, like I hardly even wanted to stand up to my teacher and ask a question, let alone go up against a whole government body who literally runs the country. Like,
really? Can
you imagine the strength that takes, the drive, the passion, the upset it takes. Yeah. Like just how far it has to
gumption.
Get. How far it has to get for them to be pushed to that point to be like, you know what? Fuck everyone. I'm going straight to the root of the problem. And that is the government. So I want to mention here, like, this seems to be a super common theme among all, I mean, not among all young activists, but like among activists in general. But there's one quote that comes to mind when you say that they're quite literally fighting for their lives. It was from a boy named Feliquan Charlamagne. He lives in Florida. He's 18. And he says that, I'm going to say the direct quote here, that climate change is not some abstract future issue, but it is something that is happening in people's lives every single day. And one thing he repeatedly says in terms of climate action is that solutions have much more depth when Black and brown voices are centered. And he said, my life is literally on the line here. So like him coming from, no, like it's such a like a news flash, almost like a reality check, that it's very negatively impacting some certain communities around the world. And it shouldn't be stood for anymore. Like it has to stop.
But yeah, inspiring. Those kids, 15 of them. My goodness.
But I'm thinking, Kendra, like as inspiring as it is, and don't get me wrong, it is like beyond incredible, but it shouldn't have, like, should it be their responsibility to be doing this? I really don't think it should. I mean, they are just bearing the impacts that
they're definitely taking on the responsibility, and they're taking on the weight that it should not be on their shoulders, because we should have never subjected them or projected this onto them.
And what's worse,
I totally agree.
Or not even as worse, but what's equally worse of like having young people take on this responsibility is that adults who are in power and who have the ability to change our systems are ridiculing and criticizing and bullying people. Especially, there was a conference a few months back where adult males on social media were then criticizing Greta.
Yeah,
who do you think you are, and what gives you the audacity to do that? Yeah, the male audacity to just harp on someone who's coming with science, fact, and reason on why there needs to be change and why fight against climate is real and the effects. And you have all these voices coming at you, respectfully proving their point and demonstrating what's going on, and for you just to be like, no,
No thanks.
I'm an adult. I know what's real. You're just a child.
Yeah.
The absolute gall of some people, older people, like even I think people around our age too, who try to look down on or make fun of kids for what are they doing? They're trying to make the world better. And at what level is that ever something we don't want? Why are you making fun of what
I know.
No, I completely agree. It definitely should not be their responsibility. I know.
Make it make sense. I like
Make it make sense.
Make it make sense. All right.
No, I'm glad we addressed that. I think that's very important.
But then that leads into another thought is like, who has this access to activism?
Yeah, and we keep coming back to this too. It's a reoccurring theme.
I have thoughts.
Oh, Kendra, me too. I feel like I could go let's make
this
podcast 3 hours.
Let's go.
Do it.
Just live
Kendra,
stream
you
every
tell me
episode.
Okay. So here's my thing. I have a few things. One, I think a lot of activism has to come down to time and resources. I think the reason why a lot of movements start with youth or start with students, a lot of them start on university campuses where a lot of ideas are exchanged and all that kind of stuff. I think that's also because university campuses provide an opportunity for people to diversify their thoughts and come in contact with new ways of thinking and new experiences and all that kind of fun stuff.
And often going off that point of just like the accessibility for students is, I remember when I was in university, well, I still am, but in my undergrad, there was always stuff, like especially in first year on the bulletin boards, there was always events posted for this or come out for this or free tickets to this. Like Taylor was just saying before, there's a lot of events and programs and like training courses, webinars, like you name it, workshops, everything. They hold free ones for students all the time. So it's
because no matter what group they are, they want to hook you in and get you a part of it. So there's a lot of opportunities to really burst your bubble, if you will. And I'm going to go on that. I'm going to play on those words. But then honestly see what the world outside of school has to offer and what you have to offer.
Exactly. And it comes back to a point of awareness. Like, I think with these free events, they just want to get it out there. They want to get the word out and they want to bring awareness to these issues because oftentimes they are issues that are very prominent, but they are not very much so talked about because maybe of a lack of resources or because of a lack of access or one thing or another. It's just not as prominent as it should be in the media scene, at least. And so I think that's a really, really good point to add.
I don't know if I worded my earlier one okay. I don't know if it made sense. It was just word vomit. But I do have something to say. And this is what I got to say. So when I was in undergrad, I took a course. It was really interesting. It was on documentaries and politics in documentaries.
I think I did a course similar to that.
Yeah. And how political information is distributed and communicated to others. Very interesting stuff. I could talk about that. There's not a lot I could
Sounds like it relates well to what we were talking about earlier with the free media and the swayed information.
Honestly, any media of any type.
So one of the documentaries that we were watching was on the Occupy Wall Street movement. And so this, I promise this is going to tie back. I promise. Give me a sec. So what had happened was that it was an effective movement, mobilized a lot of people, but it did reach a standstill. And, you know, there were various reasons that the documentary went over. So I'm not an expert on this, and this is not my field. I do remember one of the things was like a clear call to action wasn't as established of like what the mandated expectations were in response. However, the problem is that the people, when you saw the videos, when you see the pictures of everyone sitting and camping out, those are people who essentially could afford to make their complaints known, not complaints known.
But they can afford to take a day or two off work and sit.
Yes. Yeah. And
it's understood.
The movement, the documentary discussed, again, this is not my introspection. It's just the documentary. Yeah. And I do not remember what it was called. I apologize. But what they were talking about is, that's how, you know, the movement was essentially, it wasn't reflective because a lot of the people that were most impacted who should be there, they can't afford to skip work. They have families to feed. They need to be there. They might put a lot more at risk if they were to attend those movements. And that right then and there kind of, to me, encompasses who has access to activism. I talked about it last week. It is a privilege to be involved. It's a privilege to take the time. You know, that's when you're a part of a movement, when something's going on, you have to ask yourself who's here and who's not here, who couldn't be here, and how do we make sure that they're still represented, and how do we make sure that they're still a part of this movement, because they, if anyone, they truly belong, you know, like they need to be.
No, that is an exactly perfect depiction of the ways in which systemic racism is inherently embedded into the environmental movement and environmental activism in general, because those who are directly impacted and those who are most affected, like you said, could not show up.
And to begin with, like, certain demographics and communities are not even invited to the table to talk about before a system's even implemented in society. It's just the same people traditionally, like, in power, and they're the ones making decisions, and they're not doing outreach to communities to ask and to brainstorm and to plan together to see how ABC would affect long-term, short-term, how it would affect businesses, communities, daily life.
Yeah, it's that community consultation aspect.
It's like,
that's completely missing.
It's an afterthought, if anything.
Some people are invited to the table just so they can say, we invite you to the table.
Just for
and that is
unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know what, Kendra, can I build on that? Because I was literally just thinking about it. So I said I'm in planning. So legally in Ontario, I think it's pretty standard even throughout Canada, when you are making any sort of planning proposal, any planning development that's going to affect the community in any way, you have to hold legally one community consultation. Okay, you have to hold one public meeting. And it seems really good in ideology, and you're like, oh, that's so great, like, you have to do this, it's by law. But it's like what you said, it's the whole thing that's going back to, it's so performative, because oftentimes like it's like, are these voices being heard? If they are, what are we doing to really integrate that in our next steps in the planning process? And I don't want to like really hone in on any municipalities, because I understand the difficulties, but I also really question how that process is working, and how can we update it to make it more integrated. And I don't know, it doesn't seem that we're really taking into account. Are we just doing it because we have to do it? Are we just saying, okay, we checked that box? Yeah. Right?
I feel like there was a lot of room for even further discussion and a lot of things that we talked about. So if there's anything that we touched on but we didn't go in deep enough, leave a comment, DM us something, because again, this is Youth in Action, phenomenal. Really love talking about our youth. But we did get into some deep conversations that I know could always be fleshed out further. So feel free to chime in and let us know what you think we missed that you'd like to hear more about, and then we can educate ourselves too. So also, we're going to link some websites in this episode's description and on our Instagram, just of lists of young Black, Indigenous, and people of color environmental activists who deserve some serious credit and recognition for all of the meaningful work that they do. I think it's fair for me to say it's super inspiring to see all these young activists taking real action in their communities, and we look forward to seeing how this movement continues to grow and encourage other young folk to take back their power and positively contribute to climate change mitigation. So, this is Green and Gritty, signing out.
Bye, everybody.
I thought we were all saying bye.
Thought I'd shake it up a little.
Have a good one, everybody.